to the Understand Your Cycle podcast, where we turn taboo topics into table topics. My name is Kapu, and today I'm joined by Alice, a doctor by background and founder of Mara Health, which is the consultancy that medically verified Understand Your Cycle. Thank you. Alice has over 8 years experience in women's health research and has worked with incredible companies such as Clue. Hello, Alice.
Hey, Kapu. So happy to be here this morning or afternoon for you. Great to join the podcast.
Thank you for joining. Today we're speaking to Alice about hormonal contraception. But before we start, could you please tell us a period-related story that you may or may not have told anybody else?
Oh, great question. Probably what I think about when I think of period stories is probably my early experiences of getting my first period and first few periods at high school. Um, so I had really, really heavy and sore periods when I first started. And I suppose probably one of the most standout memories for me would be passing out on the bathroom floor at my school.
Oh no! Oh,
Literally, yeah.
poor little
So yeah,
Alice! How old
literally,
were
I know.
you?
I was 14,
Oh,
13,
bless
14,
you.
and it probably happened when I was 15 as well. So I remember asking to be excused from a geography lesson. I knew my period was heavy and I was like, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. So I went on my own, and literally the pain was so bad. And literally I think about 15 minutes later, my teacher had to send through another girl to come and check on me to see if I was okay. And then I
Oh
actually ended up
gosh.
having to go home because my period pain was so bad and I literally was white as a sheet. So yeah, I definitely empathize with people with heavy, painful periods. I've been there, I get it. Yeah.
Oh wow.
It was traumatic.
Damn. Yeah, I can imagine. How has that sort of fed into how you feel about your periods today?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I thankfully overall I would say my periods aren't as heavy and sore as they were back then, which
Mm,
is kind of interesting that they've settled a bit more. But yeah, definitely I think I'm always very mentally prepared for my period. I know that it could be quite sore, quite bad, and I'm always a bit I still kind of find sometimes I'm surprised because I actually do have a lot of energy sometimes during my period, but I'm always mentally
mm.
prepared that, I might not. I always have my painkillers ready, my hot water bottle ready. I'm always very yeah,
You're
on it.
prepared.
Yes,
Oh
prepare for
wow.
the worst.
And how did the school react? Was it a positive sort of
Yeah,
how did
luckily it
they deal with it?
yeah, luckily to be honest, it actually wasn't dealt with too badly because I think my geography teacher was female as well, which helped. So I think she was kind of understanding what was going on, and I think she knew that I wasn't trying to skive or trying to avoid class. I
Mm.
think she knew it was
I
genuine.
mean, you were passed
Um,
out.
yeah, exactly. And then basically, yeah, I got to go down to the front kind of nurse's room and lay in the bed there until my mom could finish work and come pick me up. So yeah, it was they were quite good about it to be fair at least,
Okay.
which was nice.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Well, we're going in onto a slightly different topic, but very
Yeah,
related. So at the moment, there's a lot of debate online about contraception and hormonal contraception in particular. It has
yeah,
obviously been instrumental in women's liberation, but we're still putting up with a lot of nasty side effects, and a lot of us just don't really know what's going on in the contraception
yeah,
world, what we should be on, what's right, what's wrong. So, our first question, and we actually asked our audience for questions, so some of these are picked from the audience,
yeah.
is do we have a menstrual cycle when we're on hormonal contraception?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's kind of one that probably isn't well explained and something that people don't know as well. So it definitely changes your cycle when you're on hormonal contraception. So it really depends on what you're taking and how that affects your cycle. So definitely you don't have a menstrual cycle in the traditional sense, especially because ovulation can be affected. It may be suppressed and not happen at all. And you will have changes then to your hormonal fluctuations as well. So it depends on what you're taking. So if you're taking the combined pill, for example, or combined hormonal contraceptives, you've got estrogen and progesterone. So thinking of things like the ring, the patch, combined pill, because they typically work by suppressing ovulation, it means that you don't have that typical menstrual cycle, so that typical rise and fall of your hormones. Um, because of the fact that we don't want ovulation to be triggered in the same way. We don't want an egg to be released. And that's really how it works to help prevent you becoming pregnant if you're taking it. You still do get the bleeding, the withdrawal bleeding towards the end of your period of taking the pills, for example. So sometimes people can think that's the period, but it's actually a withdrawal bleed. So it's just because of hormonal changes that you experience that bleed. So it can kind of feel though like it is your
Mm.
period, and I think a lot of people feel, I guess it kind of helps them feel like they still have that cycle, having that withdrawal bleed, especially if you're on the combined pill, for example. So yeah, there's definitely kind of similarities there. And what's also interesting is that some people, even though they're on hormonal contraceptive and they don't have the typical cycle, they still do get changes in their cycle that you would expect with a normal cycle of someone who's
Mm.
not on hormonal contraceptive. So, you still may get that kind of premenstrual, pre-period type symptoms of like low energy, bloating, fatigue. And then you also may have times where you're feeling more energetic mid-cycle and that sort of thing. So it's definitely really interesting, and it's still worth kind of tracking and seeing what's going on for you. I suppose if you're taking something that's progestin only, so just containing a synthetic progesterone, it can be a bit different. You may have kind of more irregular bleeding patterns throughout the cycle. You may have no bleeding at all. And I suppose if you're on longer acting options like hormonal IUDs and that sort of thing, you may have no bleeding at all. So you may have, in some ways, some people feel like they've got less of a cycle because they're not kind of taking the pill every
Mm.
day. But yeah, it's very, very individualized and varies depending on the person.
Super interesting. We actually had a debate with
Yeah,
some female friends recently, and someone was adamant that she had her cycle on the pill, and on the other side, someone was
wow.
saying like, no, you can't have your cycle on the pill. So it's super interesting to know that you can, but it's dependent on I assume the person
Yeah,
really.
exactly. It really depends on the person, and especially if you're taking, for example, the pill every day, you're kind of getting that like instant kind of spike of hormone, like
Mm.
of the estrogen progesterone that you're taking. So you are kind of getting like that kind of pulsating kind of your hormones as you go along. And I think it just depends on your body and how it responds to that higher level of hormones and whether it finds kind of a rhythm or balance with that. But yeah, it's so interesting, definitely.
And so usually do people find a rhythm? Because for example, the menstrual cycle, I'm not on hormonal contraception. I I
Yeah,
know like what happens in each of my phases and it's fairly
yeah,
predictable now. For them,
yeah,
even though for someone on not them, for someone on hormonal
yeah.
contraception, would it be
Yeah.
predictable as well, or does it change fluctuate more?
So really, yeah, really interesting question, Kathy. And I guess again, I would say this is very individualized
Mm.
and depends on the person. But I think this is really a case of where, tracking and keeping a record of your experiences throughout your cycle is so important. Because it really does depend on the person, and I will iterate that, and everyone's kind of normal is different. But I do think that, if you are taking the pill, or, maybe on a longer acting form of contraception, you probably will eventually find some sort of rhythm or pattern.
Mm.
I think probably because when you think about it, your body's going to be, if you're taking the pill for years, or if you're on something for, multiple years that's longer acting, you probably will find some sort of rhythm or some sort of pattern over that time. Like say you might notice like, your boobs are a bit more tender at some point. You'll have your bleed. You may
Mm.
notice how you feel before and after your bleed. So I think there is kind of still that opportunity for patterns to be found if you're really kind of keeping an eye in and monitoring things.
Okay,
But
awesome.
yeah, won't
Yeah,
always happen for everyone.
it
But yeah.
depends on the person.
Yeah.
And that links in super well to my next question, which is there anything that we could or should be tracking if we're using hormonal contraception?
Yeah, great question as well. And I think kind of I already touched on that a little bit with my previous
Mm.
answer, but I think first of all I want to preface this that I am a little biased. I work at Clue, which is a period tracker app. So I'm very kind of pro tracking. I'm very much like, you do need to track, let's find out more. So I am going to say that. So I definitely think that there are things that you can track, and in my opinion, that you should track if you're keen to know more. And of course, if you're not on hormonal contraceptive and you have just kind of a normal cycle that's not modulated by hormones, it's really useful to track. But I still think it is useful to track if you're on hormonal contraception too. There are many things that you can still track. So, for example, your bleeding patterns. So, looking out for your withdrawal bleed, making sure that's happening on time, finding out the duration of your bleed, how heavy the bleed is. Um, I think, especially with bleeding patterns, I think that's a really important one,
Why?
because also then you can
Please.
notice. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, good question. Because I think I think it's super important because obviously with combined pill option, for example, you're expecting your withdrawal bleed at a certain time. And, for example, if you've not kept a good record, you may experience bleeding at different times. And if you're not sure, you could just put that down as withdrawal bleeding, but actually, bleeding outside your period or outside your typical withdrawal bleed isn't normal and definitely should be investigated, just in case it's caused by something else, like something more serious, or even, things like a polyp or that sort of thing. I think it's really important to monitor your bleeding patterns, to make sure that everything is normal and healthy within you. Also things like, monitoring your different experiences throughout your cycle. So like we mentioned before, maybe mood changes across the cycle, how you're feeling, at the again, I'm talking about cycle. Obviously, it is different if you're on hormonal contraceptive, but let's just say maybe over a few weeks or a month. So monitoring how you're feeling in terms of your mood. Do you notice any changes coming up to your withdrawal bleed? Is there any point in the month where your energy is better? Maybe you're more tired, your motivation. So all those things can be affected throughout the cycle. And really, monitoring that and getting to know when you're at your best, when you're maybe feeling at your worst is really helpful for just kind of everyday life and work and relationships. So I think it's really helpful to have that information and be able to plan a little better about how your routine can look and schedule things around how you might be feeling.
Yeah. Yes. I agree. I do it and it's changed my life.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. So, um, a lot of people have been considering, at least in my circles, and I think
Yeah.
generally, are considering stopping hormonal contraception. How long does
Yeah.
it take for a cycle to go back to what we suppose as normal if we
Yeah.
stop hormonal contraception?
Yeah, great question. And again, this totally depends on what you're taking and also how long you've been taking it, and also your own kind of body and your own physiology, and how quickly that will happen for you. Um, Probably on average, like for example, with the typical combined pill, it probably takes about 1 to 3 months for your kind of cycle to return to its normal. So maybe obviously depends how long it's been since you've had your kind of normal cycle pre hormonal contraceptive. But about the 1 to 3 month mark, you should start to be seeing your periods coming back more regularly, maybe cycle symptoms that you would have had before, experiences that you had before kind of coming back as normal as you would have expected. But what is interesting is things like ovulation can take a little bit longer to come back. So you may still have that kind of normal, well, sorry, we're going to overuse the word normal today, but obviously I mean normal for you is what I
Yeah.
mean. I don't mean normal for everyone. But you'll probably have maybe that kind of that cycle changes and your hormones will start to go back to normal, but actually it can take up to maybe about 6 months for ovulation to go back to normal. So although you're kind of getting back to normal, you might not be 100% back to what you were before. Um, Similarly, if you're taking things like the patch or the ring, it would probably be about a similar time, so about 1 to 3 months. Ovulation could be a little bit quicker to come back than, for example, a combined pill. Um, and then also with things like, for example, the injection, so like the depot, it's actually an interesting one because it usually is a bit longer for cycles to return to normal. So typically people take the depot about every 12 weeks or so as an injection. So with this, it normally does take quite a few months, maybe up to a year, for cycles to go back to normal, and for ovulation to kind of resume as it did before.
Okay. Awesome. I mean, not awesome, but like that's super
Yeah.
good to know. Um, and
Yeah.
are there?
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. Please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting. I think also It is important though to think, because I think sometimes people think, okay, my cycle hasn't returned to normal. Like, what does that fully mean? But what I would reiterate is that if you're someone who's stopping your contraception, your return to fertility can be quite quick. So it just is important that if you are taking contraception for, preventing pregnancy, to think about, using other methods like barrier methods in
Mm,
the meantime, just to make sure you're covering yourself, because even though your cycle hasn't fully returned to normal, you could be ovulating again and be completely normal and maybe back to like full fertility. So I would just kind of say that with that is that don't just assume because your cycle isn't normal that you're not back to like full fertility and able to like become pregnant basically.
that's so interesting. Noted. And
Yeah.
other than the length of time to get back to our menstrual cycle, are there other things that we should be aware of if we're stopping hormonal contraception?
Yeah, good question. So, yeah, definitely. I think the biggest one is that kind of return to fertility and taking
Mm,
extra precautions. And I
yeah.
feel, sorry, I feel very much like a mom here, like lecturing about like be careful, guys. Like, but yeah, I think it is. It's one of those things that's obvious, but it's also important. But I suppose additionally, I think, like we kind of said, yeah, you may actually take a while to get back to your normal, and like we said before, you might not remember what your normal was like before, and actually. You could have been someone who maybe had heavy periods before, maybe your periods were a bit unpredictable at times, maybe they weren't always as regular. And actually, sometimes you may have forgotten what that was like. And maybe when you return to normal, those things could start again. So your period
Mm,
could be heavier again. It may be a bit more unpredictable. So you may see some things that were maybe masked a little bit by the fact that you were taking the contraception. So just to be aware that you may experience that. I suppose as well, um, you may notice like mood changes as well. So it, again, very much depends on the people. Some people say that like they don't notice significant mood changes when they take contraception. Some people do. So I think it would just be something to be aware of, that potentially your mood might be a bit different as you're coming off it. It may improve as well, which could be a good thing. And then I suppose I suppose other things too. For example, um, you may notice a change in your sex drive. So some people may find that they feel their sex drive increases after they've come off the of contraception, or you may feel like it's gone down a little bit. Obviously, a lot of that ties into mood and other symptoms and that sort of thing. But yeah, definitely interesting to still kind of track what's going on during that time, and kind of find your new normal post the contraception, and see how your body kind of adjusts, basically.
okay. And if say someone has come on or went on the pill when they were 14 or very young, which
Yeah,
actually is quite a lot of people, is it
yeah,
possible, because I guess when we're maturing and when we're becoming an adult, we've never really had our period as an adult. So, or would it
yeah.
be the same as when we were 14? I don't know. Like, how does that play into all of this?
Yeah, Capu, again, like a great question. And I feel like this sounds like a cop out, but it is so true. It really is so variable depending
Mm,
on the person. But what we do find is that a lot of people do have kind of, with their first periods, first cycles, that does take a while for your body to kind of find a rhythm and that kind of normal for them. So I would say it would be interesting. I would expect that probably most people will notice some difference potentially between when they were kind of early teens and if they started birth control and then stopped. I would say there would be a difference between the cycles, but I would say it depends. If you're someone who started taking like birth control maybe at 18, so you had like maybe 5 6 years of kind of a semi-regular cycle, you probably are more likely to kind of find something similar after birth control. But if you're someone like you said, Kapu, who started quite early, maybe like at 13 14, maybe you only had a cycle for
mm,
like a year or two max, it is possible that it could be quite different, and your kind of adult period and adult cycle could be quite different from the one you had at 13 14.
yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you. Can you talk a bit more about the different types of pills?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've kind of been talking as we go along. I'm kind of throwing out words here and there about the different pills that there are. as we're going anyway. But yeah, definitely happy to dive into a little bit more detail
Yeah.
around them. The main two that people mostly hear of are the combined pill and then the progesterone only pill. So the combined pill contains both estrogen and progesterone in synthetic forms, which just means that it's a man-made version of both hormones. The progesterone only pill contains progestin, which is also a synthetic form of progesterone. So it just helps mimic what would happen when your body normally produces progesterone. Those are the two that are most commonly prescribed. And typically, if, for example, speaking on UK experience, if you go to the GP and ask for hormonal birth control, probably one of the first things you get prescribed is the combined pill, assuming that you've no kind of contraindications or reasons that you can't take it. So that's usually what people get started on. And oftentimes maybe people start on that and then switch to the progesterone only pill, or they might start directly onto the progesterone only pill. The combined pill is normally taken for 21 days, so 3 weeks consistently. And then you have a 7-day break. And usually during that break, that's when the withdrawal bleed will happen. So due to kind of the hormone levels are falling, and then that causes the bleed to happen. But just to reiterate, it's not the same as like a typical period as such. It is just kind of your body getting rid of some built up tissue and kind of resetting in a way. In terms of kind of how it works, the combined pill works by preventing ovulation happening. So it means that the egg isn't actually released from the ovaries, from the ovary, because usually it's just one for each cycle. And it also helps thicken cervical mucus, which makes it a bit harder for sperm to get into and up and through into the uterus. And also it helps thin the lining of your uterus. So it means that you're not getting kind of the same thickening, and that's why actually the combined pill is really helpful for people with heavy periods, heavy bleeding, because you kind of don't get the same thickening that you could get otherwise. And then in terms of the progesterone only pill, sorry, I feel like I'm
No,
I feel
don't
like I'm
worry. This is
lecturing on a bit.
fascinating. No. But this is so good. This is so good.
Yeah,
Please don't
yeah.
worry.
Perfect. But the progesterone only pill, it's also useful. And what people find with that is it can be helpful if you're someone who likes the routine of taking the pill every single day. Because I think with 3 weeks on, 1 week off, it probably is a bit harder to remember, okay, when you're starting, when are you stopping?
Yeah.
So with the progesterone only pill, you take it at the same time every day, just consistently. And how it works, the main action is to help thicken your cervical mucus. So again, kind of helping prevent sperm to reach the egg, and also it helps thin the lining of your uterus as well. So they kind of have both of that action. And then it depends on the specific progesterone only pill. Some will also suppress ovulation as well, but that just depends on the pill type that you're taking. And in terms of other options, there are some other options as well, which you definitely can discuss with your healthcare provider if you're interested in. You do get some combined pills that you can actually take for longer. So instead of doing the 3 weeks on, 1 week off, you can take for 12 full weeks, just to have that kind of constant taking, and then you have a period of time where you don't take the pill. So some people like that because maybe they want to have less withdrawal bleeds. Maybe they want, I don't know, I guess maybe if you're like swimming or maybe competitive, or you're going on holiday, sometimes people take pill packets back to back to try and prevent that withdrawal bleed happening. And then you also can get lower dose pills that contain lower amounts of estrogen than normal combined pills, which can also help potentially reduce the side effects that are associated with estrogen. So there's definitely the main two options are the combined hormonal pill and the progesterone only, but there are kind of other options and regimens that you can take as well that are available.
Okay, thank you so much for all that information. People say that hormonal contraceptives are what helps their PCOS and endometriosis symptoms. Are there other ways to do this? And could you quickly explain what PCOS and endometriosis are, just in case people don't know, before you answer that question,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah, of course, of course. So PCOS or PCOS is polycystic ovary syndrome. And basically it's a condition that happens where the ovaries become, sorry, I really like to explain things using the terminology and the word, but basically the ovaries become polycystic, which means they have many cysts. And sometimes that can mean that they become enlarged because there's quite a few cysts around the ovaries. And typically what happens is PCOS manifests in having more irregular periods. Often people have maybe difficulty losing weight. It can lead to skin changes because of imbalances of hormones. In particular, you can get elevated testosterone, so kind of like the typical male hormone. So that can lead to that can lead to skin changes. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you explain what a cyst is, just in case someone doesn't know?
Oh, yeah, good point actually. How would I describe a cyst? I suppose a cyst is it's like a fluid filled sac. I suppose like a little fluid filled. Yeah, it's
Yes.
kind of yeah. It's
I
basically
have
yeah. It sounds a bit
PCOS
gross.
and you literally
Yeah,
just see that on the
yeah,
what's it called? The ultrasound, you just see like these little
yeah,
white blobs.
yeah. Exactly, and that's what it looks like. It's almost like I'm trying to think of what it looks like, but it just yeah. It's like yeah. I'll think of something. I'll think of something to compare it to, but I can't think of anything. But yeah, it's just like little fluid filled sacs. That are not directly harmful or anything, but it just can, obviously with PCOS, you have this kind of imbalance in the hormones, so it can lead to hair growth, skin changes, and also as well with PCOS, it can lead to more difficulty with fertility is the other thing with PCOS. Just because you've got all these extra cysts, you've got kind of hormonal changes going on as well. So that's why actually things like PCOS are actually often, underdiagnosed. Like people just don't know they have it until maybe they're trying to conceive. And and unless you've had a scan and maybe you don't have symptoms, you may not know that you have got cysts in your ovary, for example. So yeah, definitely very interesting one. And in terms of endometriosis, so endometriosis is where you have tissue that is like the lining of your womb. So that's but the word kind of endometriosis, the endometry part kind of refers to the womb, and osis is kind of refers to a disease process. So basically, it means that you've got kind of thickening and extra tissue that's like the endometrial lining in different parts of your body. So you could have extra kind of within the womb, so that can lead to like heavy periods, passing, more clots, that kind of thing. But also people can get it in different parts of their body, so it actually can spread. So you can have it, for example, within your abdomen, within your stomach area. You could have it near your bowels, near your ovaries, and also some people can get it as far away as their lungs, for example. But obviously that's a lot less common. Often it's just kind of more around the womb, ovaries, that kind of area.
Okay, thank you
But
so
yeah.
much. And so, how does hormonal contraception help, and are there other ways to help these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with PCOS, hormonal contraception does help because it can help regulate your menstrual cycles. So, one of the big things with PCOS is unpredictable cycles, unpredictable periods. People can go weeks without a period, have a really long cycles. So, taking the pill can help you regulate that a little bit more. It can also lead to kind of more frequent ovulation as well. It can kind of help you reset a little bit, which is good. And it can also help manage symptoms like kind of what we mentioned before, kind of having extra hair growth, maybe some skin symptoms that you have as well. Because it can help reduce those levels of the male hormones that we talked about. And it does give the kind of estrogen and progesterone to help regulate the cycle. So it's kind of helping to balance out your hormones in a way and kind of kickstart your cycle back to a bit more of a normal routine for you. Um, Endometriosis, the way the pill works with endo is it can really help reduce pain. So it can actually help with making your period lighter again, because you don't get the same thickening of the uterine lining as you would if you weren't taking the pill. So it can help with that. And yeah, so some people do find that kind of lightening of the period can help reduce pain, heavy bleeding, that sort of thing. Um, and in terms of what you can do yourself rather than automatically taking hormonal contraceptive, obviously I'm going to say all the cliche things that a doctor would say, but it is true. It actually is true. The important thing,
That's why we are
the
having you
important,
on the podcast, Alice.
yeah,
Don't worry.
I know. But it's one of those things. I feel like oftentimes, like we hear, diet, exercise, sleep, living a good life, like, these kind of things. It's like, it's so obvious and it's so like beaten to death, like do this, but it actually can help. And especially with, for example, with PCOS, low glycemic index foods, so foods that don't like spike your insulin and blood sugar the same way, there is research actually that's found that actually can help with symptoms and help, kind of get you back to normal a bit more. Regular exercise, having a balanced diet, all those kind of things, especially on the PCOS side, can really help, improve symptoms, improve insulin sensitivity, because that's a big thing with PCOS is often people can have find it harder to lose weight. They can kind of keep extra weight, especially around their abdomen. And actually that can lead to decreased insulin sensitivity, which means that your body doesn't quite manage your blood sugar as well as it did before. So kind of helping sort that out with low glycemic index foods, regular exercise can help kind of balance your symptoms, balance your hormones a little bit more. And otherwise, there's obviously the other things too that you can do with PCOS. If you're more interested from the symptom side of things, well, I'm saying that, I guess, still having good skincare if you are having skin changes because of it. Obviously, the cause is still hormonal, so there probably is that kind of, those other things I mentioned first are more important, but there is still aspects in terms of, maintaining good skincare, drinking plenty of water, staying hydrated, sleeping well, and also like if you are someone who's got extra hair, for example, looking at, hair removal treatments, that sort of thing too. But ultimately, the root cause is the hormones. So those are kind of extra things that are coming from and not quite treating the cause in a sense. And I suppose with endometriosis, the other thing would be with endos, obviously you can take the pill, for example, to help with symptoms, but also taking pain relief as needed. Again, the things around, for example, regular exercise, sleeping well, keeping a close eye on your mood and well-being, because obviously, and with PCOS too, endo and PCOS can have a big impact on mood and well-being and that sort of thing. So making sure you're keeping time for yourself, looking after yourself, keeping well, and yeah, I suppose just kind of keeping track of all those things, seeing what's working for you, and yeah, learning from that as you go.
Okay. Stay healthy.
Yes.
This is a question that I've heard come up again and again. Is it bad for you and or your body to stay 10 plus years on the pill without stopping?
Yeah, so interesting. I think this is a really hard one actually, because again, it's very
It
much
depends on the
about that
pill.
balance. It depends on the pill, it depends on the person, it depends on your health, it depends on your family history, it depends on your lifestyle. It's like there's so many things, but so I cannot give a direct yes or no answer, because the answer is some people could stay on the pill for 10 years and have no problems, and some people could stay on the pill for 10 years and have, well, I don't want to say loads of problems, but they could have a problem or two, for example.
Yeah.
So what we do know with recent research is that it is safe, like theoretically it is safe to do that, because obviously like we wouldn't be prescribing it if we thought it wasn't, but again, it does depend on the individual and how you're finding it affects you symptom wise, lifestyle wise, that sort of thing. But it is important that, like, if you are going to stay on longer, it is kind of balancing up those risk factors for you, your health, making a decision based on your wants and needs in terms of, like, fertility, symptom management, and speaking to your healthcare provider and making sure you've made an informed decision about all the options that are out there. I think what is important is, like, the main thing, the benefit is, I suppose, kind of the freedom of, not worrying about pregnancy. Potentially if you are someone who's got more of an unpredictable cycle, having a bit more regularity, having symptom improvement, so like having less heavy periods if you're someone who's got heavy periods, and control of other symptoms like we mentioned with PCOS and endometriosis. Obviously the pill gets a lot of bad press about cancer risk, which is something like I couldn't talk about and not mention that. It has been found actually to reduce the risk of some cancers, interestingly, so ovarian
Oh.
and endometrial, and endometrial
Endometrial.
cancer. So yeah, ovarian and endometrial cancer has been found to reduce the risk of those,
Oh, cool.
but obviously it does get a lot of, yeah, it's one of those things that's probably less known about. But I suppose when you think about it with the endometrial side, because you've got less kind of the endometrial thickening, there's less
Yeah.
chance of kind of, cancer happening from that. You've got a thinner lining. But then it obviously gets the bad press on the side of like breast cancer, and also cervical cancer as well. There's a link between, pill use and a higher risk of both of those cancers. So that is something to be aware of. Also, there is a risk of, a higher risk of having, for example, blood clots. So like deep blood clots, for example, in the legs and the calves. And also, blood clots, for example, within the lungs as well. So there is a higher risk of that. And again, though, it does depend on the individual. So, for example, if you are someone who's taking the pill, it's still important to, remain active, stay hydrated. If you're on a long flight, doing your calf raises, making sure you're getting up and walking around, and that sort of thing. And also as well, I guess, like we kind of talked about before, potential mood changes too. So some people may find that their mood changes being on it, and potentially if you're on it longer term, I guess you could have that kind of mood change for longer in a sense. So ultimately it is safe. It really depends on the person, and some people will do it and have no negative effects. Some people will do it and they may have negative effects. So it really, really varies.
Okay, thank you so much. That was my last question. Thank you so, so much. Actually, it wasn't my last question. It was my last on hormonal contraception. But we
Yeah.
end every episode of Understand Your Cycle with this question. What is one thing you'd tell your younger self about periods?
Wow, good question. What do I tell myself about my periods? I suppose I think the biggest thing is probably that you can talk about it, and actually talking about it with others is really helpful. So I would say that, like, for example, my mom was really supportive and like giving information about it and talking about it. But I think for quite a while I was quite shy to speak about it with my friends during high school and stuff. And only when I got to university that I was probably more freely talking about my
Mm,
periods with my friends. So I think that I would say, yeah, looking back, it's okay to talk about it. It's good to talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it with your friends. Don't be afraid to talk about it in front of boys or males. I think also, I think sometimes we're afraid sometimes as women to talk about these things in front of them. But,
mm.
I have no qualms now. I'm saying in front of my boyfriend, I'm on my period or whatever. And I think that's the way it should be. So I think continue improving the conversation around it. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much. This has been super interesting. Thank you, Alice.
Thanks, Kapu. It's been great speaking to you.
Thanks for listening to the Understand Your Cycle podcast. Understand Your Cycle is a platform that empowers women to learn to love their cycle. Follow us on social media or sign up to our free Cycle Sync newsletter to learn more about your menstrual cycle. Check out our medically verified guide to learn everything we should have been taught at school, along with our medically moderated forum where we discuss all things women's health without taboo nor shame on our website. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It means the absolute world. Thanks again, and see you next week. Love, Kapu. P.S. You're bloody amazing.